And so Jim did ask me to maybe expand on the podcast that I did. And I've been actually teaching this material for years and put it in my book, Unscripted, about these different approaches to evangelism and sort of some perspective on how I see them developing right now, and some choices I think we need to make to change some of the ways we think about evangelizing in our cultures. So let's talk about breaking out of the Christian subculture. And this is a title I gave this presentation to help leaders understand the situation we're in and the choices we're going to have to make to change the way we evangelize. All right. Hold on just a minute here. Let me see if I can get it squared away. Okay, here's the dilemma for Christian leaders. The longer we lead, the more we are immersed and encapsulated and even ensnared by Christian subculture. I know that when I started out as a young ministry leader 40 plus years ago, I had come out of a non-Christian family and a non-Christian context and non-Christian setting, and I knew a lot of non-Christians and had a lot of relationships in those communities. But over the years, I've had to really work at it, because the longer I'm a Christian, and especially the longer I'm a Christian leader, the more I'm drowning in, if you will, Christian subculture. Another problem, another dilemma is the longer we lead, the harder it is to model infiltrating communities with the gospel. And then third, the longer we lead, the more rewards there are for ministering to Christians. You know, I speak constantly in Christian context, conferences, seminars, churches, places like today, and I get a lot of rewards for that. I get a lot of pats on the back, a lot of compliments, and a lot of encouragement. You know, it's quite frankly easy to just do that all the time and just stay constantly focused on Christian ministry and Christian people, because there's more rewards there. Actually, sometimes people even pay me for talking in front of people, which is amazing to me that they do that. But wow, there's that reward as well. And frankly, it's been a long time since a lost person gave me an honorarium for coming to talk to them about Jesus. So the longer we lead, the more we're immersed, the harder it is to infiltrate, and the more rewards. And then finally, the more isolated we are from lost people. I'm a seminary president. I get up every morning with a Christian wife. I drive to work and I work with Christian people. When I leave the campus, I go to speak in Christian churches, or when I go to speak, I speak in Christian conferences. When people take me out to lunch, it's Christian leaders who want to talk about Christian leadership. I have to make intentional choices to break out of those patterns and break out of the Christian subculture if I'm going to connect with lost people at all. And so my conclusion is that many fine Christian leaders, and I emphasize that, they're really fine Christian leaders, have lost their culture or community infiltration mindset. We've just become members of the Christian subculture. That's where we live, eat, breathe, think, recreate, and do all of our activity. So that context, I want to talk about now contemporary evangelism strategies, and spend a little time here laying out some differences and get you to think about them with me. As I've thought about evangelism strategies and looked at them over the last several years, they really fall into three broad categories. The first one are what I call attraction strategies. Now, just to wake you up there, why don't you read out loud with me what you see on the screen? A Christian event or program designed to accommodate unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus Christ. Now, this is an attraction strategy. It's a Christian event or a program that's designed to accommodate unbelievers. It's for unbelievers, and we want to introduce them to Jesus Christ. Attraction evangelism. Now, this could be any wide range of examples, and I'm going to give some examples in contrast in a minute. But this is basically where we're inviting lost people to come and participate in something where they're going to hear the gospel. Okay, so attraction strategies. The second broad category of evangelism strategies are what I call engagement strategies. This is an event or a program designed to extend ministry to unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus. An event or program designed to extend ministry to unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus. Now, notice that you see a little bit of a shift here. Attraction strategies are designing events or programs that invite unbelievers to come and learn about Jesus. Engagement strategies, we turn it just slightly and we take the event or program to unbelievers to try to introduce them to Jesus. Okay, so far so good? All right, number 3. Third category are what I call infiltration strategies. Read it out loud with me. The deployment of believers throughout the culture to introduce unbelievers to Jesus Christ in their context. So notice this is a even more remarkable shift from attraction. Now we're deploying believers into the culture to introduce unbelievers to Jesus Christ in their context. Okay? Now let's go back through these again. Attraction, a Christian event or program designed to accommodate unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus. Engagement, an event or program designed to extend ministry to unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus. Infiltration, the deployment of believers throughout the culture to introduce unbelievers to Jesus Christ in their context. Now, let me now give you some illustrations that will help you understand the difference between these 3 approaches. Let's first of all talk about sports. Sports is a vehicle for evangelism. An attraction strategy would be having a Christian high school quarterback from your local team speak at your church and invite all the teenagers in your city to come and hear him give his testimony. That's an attraction strategy. An attraction strategy might be inviting a professional athlete to come to your Sunday morning worship service and give his testimony or even preach a sermon or participate in an interview in which the gospel is shared. And you invite people and encourage people to bring their friends to hear this athlete. These are attraction strategies. Remember the definition? An event or program designed to accommodate unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus. So we have a high school quarterback who's going to speak about his Christian faith, and we invite people to come and hear that at a Friday night rally of some kind for teenagers in your community, or a Sunday morning worship service where you invite a professional athlete and you have that person get up and share their testimony or participate in an interview where the gospel is shared and unbelievers hear the gospel. Now, that's attraction. Now, what would sports look like with engagement? Well, a sports engagement strategy might be operating a youth sports program from your church, like Upward Basketball or Upward Cheerleading or something like that. This is an event or a program designed to extend ministry to unbelievers and introduce them to Jesus. So a sports program operated by your church, like Upward Basketball or Upward Cheer, would be an example of an engagement strategy. You're actually doing something to extend ministry to unbelievers and invite them to learn about Jesus. Another one of these might be forming a church softball team and getting a group of people together, men and women, saved and unsaved, and playing in a church league in your community and trying to extend ministry to unbelievers by inviting them to participate with you and introducing them to Jesus. But in the sports area, what would infiltration look like? Well, let me give you some examples. An infiltration strategy would be pulling together the leaders in your church that are involved in community sports and releasing them from teaching Sunday school or role ambassadors or youth group, and instead sending them into your community to coach Little League, to coach flag football, and to coach girls cheer. It's sending people into the community, deploying believers throughout the culture. It's sending people out, not inviting people to come and hear, not even organizing Christians to go and do. It's sending Christians into the culture to share the gospel by becoming Little League coaches, by becoming volleyball coaches, by becoming cheerleading coaches. This is in the area of sports, infiltrating the community. Another example was what I did for 10 years. For 10 years, before the seminary relocated to Southern California, I was the chaplain for the San Francisco Giants. This was an infiltration strategy. I worked for a Christian ministry called Baseball Chapel, which is contracted to professional baseball through the commissioner's office to provide chaplains to all 300 professional teams in North America. I was the chaplain for the Giants, which meant I went into the clubhouse every week with the gospel of Jesus Christ, infiltrating on their turf in their context with the gospel. That's an infiltration strategy. Now that's just sports. Let me give you another set of examples. Let's talk about using Bible study or using the Bible to do this. Inviting someone to Sunday school is an attraction strategy. Would you come to our event and study the Bible with us, and we will there accommodate you, and go back to the definition, we'll there accommodate you and introduce you to Jesus. Sunday school is an attraction strategy. Then how about starting a Bible study at work, where you say, no, we're going to, in our town, we have people that work shifts. We did this in my town when I was first pastor years ago. And we started a Bible study at 11 o'clock at night that met just outside the gate where guys came off the late shift. We knew they weren't going to get up and come back to Sunday school the next morning at 7 or 8 o'clock or 8 or 9 o'clock when they got off at 11 or 12 o'clock the night before. So we just started a Bible study, a ministry engagement at their place that was designed to extend ministry to them and invite them to Jesus. And then, of course, an attraction strategy would be, as I said, corporate chaplaincy, where you say, I'm going to deploy through the culture. And instead of doing Bible study where you come to my Sunday school, or even Bible study where I start a class in your context, I'm going to move into corporate chaplaincy and work in a trucking company or in a hospital or even in a sports team. And I'm going to take the gospel there and introduce people by asking them to join me in one-on-one Bible study about the gospel. Let me give you another set of examples. Let's talk about children's ministry. An attraction strategy would be opening a children's home, creating an orphanage, if you will, and saying we're going to welcome people into this context, and in that place, we're going to introduce them to Jesus Christ. An engagement strategy related to children might be an after-school mentoring program. We're going to create an event or program that's designed to extend ministry to unbelievers. And we're going to do this in the community, maybe at our church building or maybe at a local school, but we're going to create an engagement process by which we take the gospel into the community. But what would an infiltration strategy look like? Well, one great example is a church in Washington State that decided to infiltrate their foster care system for their county. The pastor met the director of foster care for the county, a very secular woman, and she explained to him some of the needs they had and how they were far short of the number of foster families they needed. So he challenged his church to become the primary provider of foster parents for the county, and they did that. At one point, they had 10 couples in their church serving as foster parents, not at a Christian orphanage and not in an after-school mentoring program, but in the state-sponsored system where they were infiltrating in that system with the gospel of Jesus Christ and introducing children to faith in Jesus through that means. Okay, so I've given you illustrations here to try to help you get the picture of communicating. Christian leaders, like most of us, become captured in the Christian subculture, and we take a one-dimensional approach to evangelism, which is usually attraction. But I think that we're going to have to rethink our evangelism strategies in the context of these three categories: attraction, engagement, infiltration. And we're going to have to see that they are not the same, and they require a very intentional choices to opt to adopt them and to use them effectively. Now, before I open it for questions on this first section, let me make some concluding observations, 4 of them. Number 1, all 3 of these strategies have value. I'm not speaking against any of the 3. I think we're way out of balance right now, but I don't think that attraction, for example, even though we're way out of balance toward attraction, I don't think it's a wrong strategy. I think it's a good strategy. It's just we're out of balance on it right now. So all 3 strategies have value. Second, synergy can make all 3 strategies more effective. For example, if I'm out there coaching Little League, which I did I coached and umpired Little League for 15 years. If you're out there doing that and you are talking to the parents of the players on your team and opening up gospel conversations and talking with them about their spiritual lives, and then you can invite them to church with you on a Sunday where you know there's going to be a really good attraction service that's been planned that will accommodate unbelievers, make them feel welcome, and present the gospel to them. This is fantastic. So synergy makes all 3 effective. These 3 strategies, attraction, engagement, infiltration, don't need to stand alone. They need to work in partnership, okay? Another aspect of the synergy is you're never going to get everyone in your church participating in infiltration strategies or even in engagement strategies. It's just not going to happen. So if you have good synergy among all three of these approaches, it makes it possible for you to get many more people involved in evangelism outreach because you're focusing and channeling them where they feel most comfortable and where they're able to work most effectively. And then third, and that creates greater synergy. Third observation is that attraction and engagement are increasingly inadequate for reaching secular people. I think they're inadequate for several reasons, but there's at least two that I want to point out today. And that is, first of all, they're very expensive. And second, they're largely ignored. Now, you may think, oh, you don't understand how attractive our churches are in our community. Well, yeah, I think I do. You need to get out of your church on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock and drive around and see just how unattractive you are to most lost people. They're not coming to your church, okay? I don't care how good your speaker, how fabulous your music, how cool your lighting, they're not showing up. You know, you got 500 people in your service. I can take you to places in your community where there's 5,000 people showing up for youth soccer, youth basketball, youth football. I can take you to the lake and show you where they're skiing and they're fishing and they're doing all kinds of other things. Look, they're not attractive. Okay, lost people are not pouring into our services. And you say, yeah, but we had a big rally and we had 1,000 people come to hear this athlete we brought in. Well, good for you. How many? What about the other 100,000 people in your town that didn't show up? I mean, all I'm saying is that attraction is very expensive and largely ignored. We're spending tens of thousands of dollars doing things that hundreds of thousands of people are ignoring every Sunday. And then engagement strategies are also very expensive and very time consuming. We're spending huge amounts of hours creating all these programs for 2 or 3 or 10 lost people to participate. So again, I'm not against attraction and engagement. I just think we're way out of balance on attraction. We're somewhat out of balance on engagement, and we're just simply not grasping how infiltration is essential for our going forward. Now, here's one that's really hard to hear, but I'm going to lay it out there for you. The main reason for resistance to infiltration strategies is rooted in our fear of ministry in venues where we are not in control. I coached 32 youth sport teams while my kids were growing up, 32 teams. And yes, I did that while I was a seminary president and while I was a state executive and while I was a pastor, because it was a priority for me to not only be invested in my children, but also be invested in evangelizing in my community as an infiltrator. So youth sports was a primary way that I did this. In those youth sports contexts, I was never in control. I didn't set the agenda. I didn't control the language that was used. I didn't have any influence over the attitudes that were demonstrated. I was never in control. In fact, when I was a chaplain for the San Francisco Giants for 10 years, I was never in control there either. Let me give you just one example. Now, remember, I was chartered through the commissioner's office, and Baseball Chapel has permission to be there in the stadium. And the Giants are obligated to do only one thing, and that is to give me a credential. And so I had a badge that I wore that got me in the ballpark. Let me underscore, that did not give me a ticket to a game. If I wanted to go to the game, I had to buy a ticket. Didn't pay for my parking. When I drove up to the stadium, I had to lay down the $25 to get to park in the stadium parking lot. But I did have a badge that got me inside the stadium and got me into the clubhouse. That's all I had. So, for example, we were doing the World Series in Detroit, and I flew there to be with the ball club. Didn't fly to many away games, but I did fly to World Series away games. I went there to be with the ball club, and the game was on a Sunday night. And the chaplain for the Tigers was so kind. He normally would do all the chapel services in his own stadium, but he said, hey, you're here, you do the Giants. And so I said, fine. So we arranged for a room for chapel to be held that late that afternoon before the game. About 5 minutes before chapel was to start, a woman came clicking down the hall in her high heels and said to me, are you the chaplain? I said, yes. She said, you can't use the room. We need it for NBC to do some interviews. Sorry. And turned around and walked away. And you may say, well, that's not right. Well, it is right. She runs the venue. I don't. She's in control. I'm not. That's what infiltrators have to deal with every single day. We are out there where nobody cares that we're Christian, and nobody's going to give us any benefit or any time of day or any deference. We're infiltrators. We're on their turf, and we have to learn how to share the gospel in those contexts. And I'm just be real blunt with you guys. This is why a lot of Christians don't want to do infiltration, and a lot of pastors don't want to try to lead their churches to do infiltration because they're not in control. Why? You might have to work on a committee with some gay people, or you might have to coach with somebody who's in a same-sex marriage. I mean, how awful would that be? Well, if that's if that's your attitude, you might as well just stop now, because you'll never be an infiltrator. You'll never infiltrate the community with the gospel if you can't be comfortable working where you have no control, no power, no vote, no influence except your character and your reputation. That's all you got. Okay? And so the resistance to infiltration strategies is really rooted mostly in our fear of loss of control. You see, we're in control of engagement strategies. I mean, we control Upward Basketball because it meets in our gym, and we set the policies, and we set the procedures, and we set the schedule, and we control the language that's used. Okay, yeah, I get all that. But I'm going to go play on my company's softball team. I'm not going to play church league softball. I'm going to go join my company's softball team, where they're going to cuss, they're going to cheat, they're going to drink beer after the game. An infiltrator doesn't play church league softball. An infiltrator goes and joins his company's softball team so that he can make friends there and have an opportunity to build relationships and start gospel conversations. And some Christians are saying, well, I just don't want to be around all that. I don't want to be around that profanity. I don't want to be around that drinking. Well, if you don't want to be around profanity and drinking, just stop now. You're never going to be an infiltrator if you don't want to be around that kind of people doing that kind of stuff. So I know I'm being a little hard here and being a little maybe more blunt than you're accustomed to, but I'm just telling you how it is. I've lived on the West Coast for 30 years, and almost all that time I've been an intentional infiltrator. I've been a little league coach. I've been an umpire. I've been involved with the Giants, and not just through youth sports, but that's been my primary means. I have been out there doing it, and I'm telling you, that's what you have to be comfortable with if you're going to be an infiltrator with the gospel. And I can tell you story after story after story of people I've led to faith in Christ in those contexts who come to a full commitment to Jesus, because I met them while they were sipping a beer and I was having a Coke after a ball game, after we had been through some experience together and got to talking about life and kids and family and what we really cared about. The gospel always comes up. Okay. I want to talk about I want to talk to you about some benefits that come to you when you become an infiltrator and how it changes your ministry. And then I want to finish up today with some practical steps you can take to become more of an infiltrator and to lead your church. First, when you infiltrate with the gospel, it models the kind of Christianity you want your followers to live daily. Nothing says infiltration works like standing up in front of your church and introducing a couple that you met on a ball field, or that you met in a foster care situation, or that you met while you were infiltrating, won them to Jesus and brought them to church to profess their faith in him. Well, nothing models that like a pastor who does it. Another benefit is it attracts people to your church, because I can't even, in the dozens, if not hundreds of people who said, now you're a pastor, right? Where's your church? And people would just start coming because they saw me in the community making a difference, and they were attracted to that. It enlarges the influence and reputation of your church. The church I founded in Oregon, Pathway Church, has the reputation for being the community-based church. I mean, they go so far, they have band concerts in their auditorium. When the high school had to shut down for some COVID, they opened it up and they had graduation ceremonies and stuff like that. I mean, it's the church where the community knows we're welcome there, because the pastors are always out there infiltrating in the community. So how can you take some steps to do this more personally? Okay. How can you take steps to infiltrate the culture personally? All right. This is for you as a leader, and then we'll talk about your church. All right. Number one, choose to change your thinking and overcome the barriers I listed above in this PowerPoint that I just skipped over. The barriers that I list are both personal and theological, and you have to make a decision. I'm going to become an infiltrator, and whatever barrier is holding me back, I got to get over it. Okay. Now, this may involve some internal struggle. I tell you, it was hard for me when I started going to church less so I could be in the community more. It was hard for me. I love church. I think church is important. I think being a part of my church is important. But I can't go to church 3 nights a week if I'm going to coach Little League. That's just not going to happen. I'm going to have to go to church 1 night a week if I'm going to coach Little League another couple of nights a week. It's just part of the trade-off. Another struggle for me was produce some relational conflict. I've had some church members say, "Hey, I saw you out in a bar with some baseball players. What about that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know. I was having a Coke with some ball players. They were having something else, but that's the way it works. If you're going to be with baseball players, you got to go where baseball players go." And I've told the players, "Hey, I'll go out and get something to drink with you, and I'll go out and get something to eat with you." And I told them, I said, "Guys, you have to understand there's just one line I can't cross. I can't go to a strip club with you guys. I can't go." And they're like, "Hey, Chaplain, we get it, no problem." But they wouldn't. But I would go out and get something to eat with them. And so that's an internal struggle, and that's also a relational conflict, as people say, "But I don't think you should be doing that," or "I saw you doing that." That leads to the third one of these barriers, and one of the results of overcoming these barriers is misunderstanding and criticism. I've had a board of trustees here at Gateway that's backed me 1,000% on being an infiltrator, but I know there's been some Christians and some Southern Baptists who don't like some of what I've done. I've been in some pretty tough situations with people and some pretty rough places and rough situations, especially with professional athletes. But you know what? They're not coming to Sunday school. They're going out and getting a beer, and you got to go and sit down and talk with them and work with them in their context if you're going to build a relationship with them. All right. So you have to choose to change your thinking and overcome the barriers. Second, you have to decide to adjust your schedule. As a Christian leader, I committed 18 weekends a year for 10 years to the San Francisco Giants. Every time the Giants were at home and at spring training, that's 18 weekends a year for 10 years. I committed to the Giants. That means I didn't travel to speak at your church. I didn't travel to speak at your leadership conference. I was with the Giants. Now, a lot of times I would work things out where I could speak somewhere within a 3-hour flight on Saturday. If I could fly home Saturday night and be there on Sunday. But for 18 Sundays and for usually 18 weekends a year, I locked it down. Now that's a transaction you have to make. So you have to decide to adjust your schedule. You're not going to be able to have church service and church activity every night if you're going to be an infiltrator. You're going to have to say, some of this church activity's got to be set aside so I can be out there infiltrating the community with the gospel and getting the gospel to people who've never heard it in their context. So you have to adjust your schedule personally and church. I remember when I was leading my church to be infiltrated. We started our church in Oregon in 1989, and we started on this model of having all three: attraction, engagement, and infiltration. And so I was teaching people how to be infiltrators, and I was modeling that. I was challenging them to do that. And this one woman who helped us with our church plan, her name was Sheila. She had grown up in a pastor's home. She had loved the Lord all her life, went straight from pastor's home, married a fine layman. He was a leader in our church as well. And just one of those salt of the earth, just wonderful women that you can build a church around. She was about, when I met her, she was around 30 years old, 35 years old, in that range. After a year of our church, she said to me one day, "Hey, Jeff, I want to tell you something that's really been hard for me." And I said, "Okay." She said, "I'm going to church less in my life than I ever have." I said, "Really?" She goes, "Yep, I grew up Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, plus one more night a week for youth group or something." She said, "That's what I grew up doing, and that's what I've always done. But you've cut me back quite a bit." And she said, "I'm going to church less right now in my life than I've ever done." And then she said, "But I'm doing more of what the church is supposed to be doing than I've ever done in my life. Thank you for helping me restore balance to my schedule." Because in our church, we challenge people. We all gather on Sunday for worship and for Bible study. We want you to set aside one more time slot a week for church activity, whether it's a Bible study or whether it's participating on a committee or something, but only one more time slot a week, maybe one morning, one afternoon, one evening. That's it. So we get Sunday and one time slot a week. That's all we get. If you have any other time that you can invest in what we're doing through our church, don't do it. Instead, find a way to infiltrate the community with the gospel. Become an infiltrator. And that's how we built our church, and that's the model we used, especially in the early years, to try to bring a balance to what we were doing. And I'll never forget that conversation with Sheila. I'm going to church less, but I'm doing more of what the church is supposed to be doing than ever before. Now, the third thing, if you're going to become an infiltrator, is to choose an affinity-based activity or project. Now, you've been hearing me illustrate this I see, I don't have these listed. I don't have this on the slide, so just jot these down. So choose an affinity with your interests, your family, and your leadership role. Now, your affinity means something that comes naturally to you. So affinity with my interests. I'm interested in youth sports, and so that was an easy one for me. Affinity with my family. All three of my kids were athletes. Now, two of them played college sports, so they were pretty good athletes. They weren't great athletes. They didn't play major college sports. They played small college, but that was fine. It just illustrates that all three of my kids liked athletics, and they all played multiple sports growing up, and our family was a sports family. So my interests and our family's interests lined up. So it was very natural for us to choose youth sports as our infiltration opportunity. I'll never forget the first mission trip, our first mission project my daughter ever organized on her own was when she was 15. She raised the money, put together the plan, got the team together, and put on a community soccer camp for kids, 9 to noon, 5 days a week for our community. And it was a phenomenal success. And my daughter was an infiltrator from the very, very beginning because it fit our family, it fit our interest, and was just naturally part of what we did. So, by the way, that wasn't a church-based activity. It was for the community, all right? Get that in your mind. It was an infiltration event. So, affinity with interests and family, but also an affinity with your leadership role. Now, listen carefully. I could not be the chaplain for the Giants if I was a pastor. All people involved in baseball chapel, with very rare exceptions, are not pastors. They're either people that were former pastors that are working in denominational roles or working in some kind of other setting or working in some kind of specialized sports ministry or some kind of individual parachurch organization, because you have to be free on Sundays to be the Giants chaplain. You're in the ballpark from 8 a.m. till 1 p.m. every Sunday, and that's not going to work for church. So I couldn't infiltrate in some ways when I was a pastor that I could in others. And then when I became the seminary president, that schedule, that leadership role fit well with being a chaplain of a pro sports team. So it worked out great for those 10 years. Then when I relocated to Southern California, and when the seminary moved to Southern California, I had to give that up because that no longer fit my leadership role. I can't be a seminary president in Southern California and be the chaplain for a sports team 400 miles away. That wasn't going to fly. So I had to give it up. So my point is that when you're thinking about an affinity, think about, what am I interested in? What's my family interested in? And what's my leadership role going to permit? And so you'll have to think about these things. And for you, it may not be youth sports. Maybe you say, well, I'm not into youth sports, I'm into hunting. Well, I know a pastor who is totally into hunting. And so he sponsors a hunting camp every year for 2 weeks. And they open it up to the community and they just advertise it openly. If you're hunting in this region up here in northern Idaho, our hunting camp is open, come by for a bowl of chili. And every night they have a pastoral call on somebody there to talk about their faith and what it means to them and relate that in some way to hunting. And so you get the idea. His affinity is hunting, so he's based an infiltration strategy around that. Excuse me. So whether it's something like that, or maybe it's some kind of other activity that you're involved in, like, for example, in my church, pardon me, my associate pastor of our church is into restoring cars. He has an incredibly beautiful pickup that he's rebuilt. It's about a 1940 or 56 pickup. I don't even know. I've seen it. It's gorgeous. And so he's joined the local car club, and that's a big thing here in Southern California. Every community has a car club. So he's a member of what's called Cruisin' Brothers, which is our local car club. So last week, 2 weeks ago, our church had our end of summer all-church picnic. And as part of that, as part of the picnic, we had a car show. That's a big thing in Southern California. So my associate pastor went to his friends, Cruisin' Brothers, the club he's a member of, and said, hey guys, our church wants to put on a car show. We'd like to invite all of you to come and show your cars for 2 hours as part of our picnic. And so 40 guys showed up and brought their cars from Cruisin' Brothers, parked them around our picnic site. We had about 350 people at the picnic. So it was a big event. And Cruisin' Brothers came and they all parked their cars. And then we had a contest where people went around and rated the cars and stuff like that. It was great fun. I looked around and could tell most of those guys weren't members of our church because I go to an African-American church, predominantly African-American. It's changing somewhat to a little more multicultural, but Our church is historically African-American, and I've been a member of it for years. And almost all the Cruising Brothers guys, all white guys, and some Hispanics, except for my associate pastor, who's an infiltrator, who's a member of that club, so he can talk to those guys, go to the monthly meeting, talk about restoring old cars, show off their cars, and share the gospel. And those guys in the club, they brought their cars, they stayed for lunch, they heard the program after. It was a great opportunity because my associate pastor is an infiltrator. Based on his affinity of the car restoration, we had those guys come to an attraction event, which was able to present the gospel to them. All right. And then that's 3 steps you have to take personally. Choose to change your thinking, adjust your schedule, and choose an affinity-based group. Now, for the next last 10 minutes here, let's talk to steps to leading your church to infiltrate the culture. So you're motivated today. You want to bring some balance to your evangelism strategies. You want to create more infiltrators. How do you do it? Number 1, lay the foundation and reinforce the effort. Several steps here. First, you got to set a personal example. You're going to have to become an infiltrator at some level if you're going to motivate people to do it and follow your example. Second, teach and preach on this theme. Have a leadership day where you spend an hour or 2 teaching what I'm teaching you today. Buy some of my books unscripted. I'll sell them to you for half price if you'll email me. I mean, I don't care about making money on books. I just want to get the word out. So I'm just saying, do some things like that to help people understand what you're talking about. And then a third part of laying the foundation is celebrate the success of people who engage the culture. So many examples of this. Like, for example, I know churches that have a public prayer dedication for all their public school employees at the beginning of every school year. Public school teachers, public school administrators are infiltrators. They're out there in the culture, representing the gospel, looking for opportunities for gospel conversations. Why not recognize them, pray for them, deploy them? I know a church that has a monthly meeting for all the people in the church who are infiltrating through youth sports. They come together, they pray together, they talk about strategies to start gospel conversations, they share victories and problems and resources. Just an hour after church once a month to just give the infiltrators a chance to talk and be celebrated and be recognized. And the pastor gives them a short devotional and challenges them to stay at the task. I know another church that does a point of light banquet every year where they call together all their infiltrators. The people are infiltrating through foster care, through youth sports, through car clubs. They pull together the infiltrators and have a banquet to say, you are points of light in very dark places. And we want you to know, we stand with you. We encourage you. We celebrate you. Some of them get to give their testimony about how they've had victories and who they've led to Jesus and where they're seeing the gospel make advances. So here's how you lay the foundation to reinforce the effort. Set a personal example, teach and preach, and then celebrate successes by doing some of these things I've described. The second strategy is to choose a small group to initiate this process. Now, don't expect everyone to be an infiltrator. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. You have Christians that are so immersed in the attraction model and so committed to engagement approaches that they can't even imagine being infiltrators. Not going to happen. So don't expect everyone to participate. Start small with a group of people that do want to do this and have realistic expectations about the pace that you can go and the impact you can make. Don't propose radical changes like we're going to stop all attraction evangelism. We're going to stop all engagement evangelism. We're just going to all become infiltrators. Don't do that. You'll fail at that. And frankly, you'll be cutting off some venues of evangelism that are still helpful and appropriate. Don't cut off attraction and engagement. Just try to move toward balance by creating some small groups of people that start the process of being infiltrators. Then third, find a way to involve people at their level of comfort, participation, or effectiveness. I'll give you an example. I have a pastor friend who decided to infiltrate the school across the street from their church with the gospel. It took him a year to build a relationship with the principal before they ever got to do anything. But once they got started, the first thing the principal wanted was, as you know, backpacks for kids who don't have school supplies. So the pastor went to the church and said, who'll do backpacks? And multiple people stepped up and did that. Well, that was such a success that the principal came back and said, do you have anyone in your church that could do some one-on-one tutoring to help kids learn how to read? He said, I believe we do. So we went back to the church and said, is there anyone here that would be willing to go into the public school and help kids learn how to read, maybe for an hour to an hour and a half, 1 or 2 afternoons a week, in this kind of a reading program Yes, there were a few that were willing to do that. And then he said, okay, we're doing backpacks, we're doing reading. Then the principal came back the next year and said, could we expand the reading to an after-school mentoring program? Well, the pastor said, that's going to be a little more challenging. We could do that, but the only way we could do that probably would be to bring some of our Christian programming, like some of our studies or some of our activities, so that we'd have something to do with these kids every afternoon after we finish with the reading program. And the principal said, hey, it's after school, you do whatever you want. Now that took 3 years to get there, but they finally got there. So now this pastor has some people who will never go into a public school, but they'll give backpacks. Some people who'll go into a public school, but only help with reading. That's about as far as they'll go. Other people go into a public school and help with a mentoring program. As long as they can bring some Christian content to it, they're more than glad to do that. Then the principal came back and said, Pastor, we've lost funding for our school crossing guards. Is there anybody in your church who could show up early in the morning and help us to keep the school crossing safe with all the traffic we have around our facility? The pastor knew he had a group of old timers that drank coffee every morning at McDonald's together. And he went to those guys and said, hey, how about you guys cut the coffee off a little bit and go down there and become the crossing guards for this school? And these guys said, we'll do it. And we'll even recruit some more guys to help us. And so these older guys started being the school crossing guards at these 3 main intersections in front of this school. So now the pastor has some crossing guards, some reading monitors, some mentoring people, and some backpack providers. He still has members, though, who will never go into the school, won't do anything about that school because it's secular and it's public and it's evil. So he recruited them. Would you become the prayer team to support the rest of us while we infiltrate this school with the gospel? That's what I'm talking about. You got to find a way to involve people at their level of comfort. Not everyone's going to be a street evangelist. But some people will pray, some will buy backpacks, some will go and teach reading, some will do crossing guards. Everybody can get involved if you have a broad understanding of how to get people on an infiltration team to go into a school with the gospel. And then, number 4, train people to sense opportunity to share the gospel and introduce the gospel where they serve. Train people to do this. And I wrote a whole section about this in my book, and I won't go over it today. But, this is where you do evangelism training. Helping people how to start gospel conversations, share the gospel in a simple way, and lead people to a faith, to a prayer of commitment to Jesus. I mean, you still have to train people how to do this. It's just evangelism training 101, helping people to learn how to do it. And then finally, don't criticize other Christian ministries. Don't criticize engagement strategies. Don't criticize attraction strategies. Don't criticize other Christians who are doing it by these other ways. They're still valid. We don't have time to be negative. We're just going to try to be more balanced by creating infiltration approaches to evangelism. All right. Well, we're running out of time here, guys. So I'm going to stop, open it up for the last 5 to 7 minutes for questions or discussion or objection or dialogue. You can read more about this in my book, Unscripted. You can use these PowerPoints any way you want to teach. And anything I can do, hey, email me or call me if I can help you one-on-one with any of this as well. All right, Jim, I'll roll it over to you.
Questions, guys? This is unusual. This group doesn't have any questions in their own.
Yeah, well, I know I've laid something out here that in one way is like, well, it's not that revolutionary, but in another way it is, because I'm challenging you to think beyond. Well, I'll just give you an example. I taught this material once, and a person came up to me after and said, I'm so glad you taught that because, we're really infiltrating the community because we started a home for unwed mothers. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but you just really missed the presentation. A home for unwed mothers is an engagement strategy. And I'm so glad you did it. And I'm not criticizing you. But if you want to infiltrate the strategy, if you want to have an infiltration strategy, you're going to have to train some volunteers to go be counselors in a secular clinic in your community that helps women with pregnancy issues. That's going to be a lot more challenging. That's infiltration. And this guy said, wow, you've blown my mind today, because I guess all I can really think of is engagement strategies. And I said, yeah, that's where most Christians are these days. That they can think attraction. And if you stretch them, they can think engagement. But telling people, I don't want you back to church. I'd rather you out coach Little League 2 nights a week. And I'm going to pray for you and support you and create a team in our church of support networks to help people like you to share the gospel with the 12 guys that are on your team and their families every year. That's a different way of thinking about evangelism.
challenges for one of the challenges for those of us in ministry is, and I deal with this as I try to schedule things for pastors. We think we are, and we are especially busy. We have full calendars. The hardest thing for me to do is get two preachers to agree on the same schedule to do anything together. And so when you talk about working something extra in, that's hard. But a lot of this is, and this is where some of your leadership equipping comes in, there's a lot of what we're doing that we need to equip others and hand off. There's a lot
Well,
of
and let me also say, there's other things we're doing that nobody should be doing. We just need to stop. Okay, that's first of all. Second, there's things that other people can be doing that we can equip. But third, there's some things that we need to stop doing because they're just not as high a priority. Look, for 18 weekends a year, guys, I mean, put it in context. I speak at 45 to 50 leadership conferences a year, okay? So I speak somewhere almost every week in some kind of conference setting, some weeks more than one. Every week I preach at a church somewhere. But I'm never going to get to all the conferences and I'm never going to get to all the churches. And so what I had to decide was I can devote so much of my time to this, but I have to devote some time to being infiltrated with the gospel if I'm really going to model for my students and faculty and really show people what I really want them to be doing as a part of their Christian leadership responsibilities. And I'll tell you this, when I've been at Gateway for 18 years, I have very seldom been asked by a student, hey, how's it going with your leadership conference speaking schedule? But I've been asked by dozens and dozens of students, tell me about what it's like to share the gospel in a baseball stadium. Tell me about how you make disciples in a context where you're doing it in the hallway outside a clubhouse. Tell me what that's like. How do you do that? Because people are fascinated with how we share the gospel and how we do it effectively. They're not so fascinated with the fact that we spoke at another conference. So I just had to say, Jim, I had to say this when I was a pastor, and I've had to say it as an executive. I have to have a disciplined, transactional, balanced schedule where I put some things in and I take some things out in order to model what I'm really trying to be as a Christian leader. And I don't do it perfectly by any means, but I've had to really limit myself because frankly, I mean, I get a lot of strokes for preaching in conferences and a lot of attaboys for preaching in churches. And I get a lot of, Christians saying, thanks for writing that book. And all that matters to me. But I also have to discipline myself to devote some time to being an intentional infiltrator with the gospel if I'm going to really make the difference I want to make. Anyway, that's just me, but that's how I've come to understand that scheduling dilemma.
Well, but that point of modeling is crucial because as I talk to folks, we struggle leading God's people. We can't lead them to something that we're not doing. We've got to preach the word, but Hebrews 13:7 says, remember your leaders who spoke to you the word of God, consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. And it scares me to death to think that somebody's going to look at how I live and model after me. But yet that's what the scripture teaches. And so if we want our people to be evangelists, we have to demonstrate what that's like. Jeff, you were sharing with us at a director's missions meeting when you were in Texas a couple of years ago about a particular experience with a player who was touched by your ministry, and he asked you to review his testimony in his book, just as an illustration of how God really works through those. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah. Well, if you're interested in a story, one of the most dramatic stories, the book is called Curveball, and it's by Barry Zito. Barry Zito won the Cy Young in the American League as the best pitcher in baseball, and then ultimately came to the San Francisco Giants. And Barry was a New Age religionist. He had read over 200 books on New Age religion. His mother had founded her own cult. I mean, he was completely resistant to the gospel. And after many years of relating to Barry as an infiltrator, the gospel broke through in his life. And he has become a very, very strong Christian. In post-baseball, he's really, really just blossomed and continued to mature in his faith. But the story of that is actually in the book Curveball. And if you have a baseball fan in your life that's not a Christian, buy that book and give it to them. It's one of the really clearest presentations of the gospel, and also a real clear presentation of what baseball culture is like and what baseball life is like before he became a Christian. So yeah, that story is one of the cool ones. Just one of the cool ones of how God used me to infiltrate and then ultimately share the gospel, and then see Barry and then his wife come to faith in Christ, and I did their wedding, and just a lot of cool stuff about that story. So thanks for asking. Curveball by Barry Zito, great book.
And so
right.
I appreciate you sharing that. There's one other testimony you shared. I know I want to let you go. You shared about a movement with the umpires of what God was doing. Can you tell us that story a little bit? And I want our guys to see how God moves through this.
Yeah, my main way of infiltrating these days is I'm no longer working with professional baseball players. Now I'm working with professional baseball umpires. In the early 2000s, a man named Ted Barrett, who is a major league crew chief, was a crew chief for the World Series 2 years ago, crew chief for the All-Star game 2 years ago. He's really at the top of the game. He also has 2 earned seminary degrees, including a D-Min. He's the Reverend Dr. Ted Barrett. He was behind the plate last night for the Giants Milwaukee Brewers game, and I was texting with him after the game, and just one of the finest Christians in the world, really. So Ted initiated a ministry entitled Calling for Christ in the early 2000s, and I've been working with him, teaching at his conference every year, mentoring, helping him mentor young umpires, speaking at the prayer meeting on Fridays, evangelizing guys in the game for all these years. And so there's a movement of God among professional umpires. There's 80 umpires in the big leagues every year that are certified to umpire at the big league level. And then there's some what are called swing umpires. Well, there's actually 72 umpires. There's 8 swing umpires. Those swing umpires go back and forth from AAA to the big leagues to cover vacations and injuries and those kind of things. So among those 80 guys, to give you an idea, when Ted started the ministry, he was the only identified Christian in umpiring that he knew. There was one other guy that was a Christian, but he was a backslidden guy, and Ted had tried to work with him, but there wasn't much there. So Ted founded the ministry as the only known believer among professional umpires. Very quickly, some guys emerged who were kind of keeping it secret, if you will, and joined the ministry, 4 or 5 guys. Well, these years later, now remember, we're talking about 80 guys maximum. On Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock Eastern time, there's a Major League Umpires call-in prayer meeting where guys call in and share prayer requests and pray from 4 to 4:30 or 4:45 every Friday afternoon. And we're averaging over 30 guys on that call now every Friday. The culture of Major League umpiring has changed. We've baptized 60 umpires in the last 15 years. And a lot of those guys are out of the game. They've retired and different things. So they're not 60 Christian professional umpires right now, but you get the idea. And I can't go into all the stories behind the scenes of how the culture has changed, but the culture has moved from a debauched, pornography-driven, alcohol-enhanced, sexually promiscuous culture to a remarkably different environment now, where there's more of a professional atmosphere, and certainly more of a family atmosphere, and certainly more of a emotionally supportive atmosphere, even among the umpires who are not believers. And so we've seen the gospel transform an entire industry, really. And I could tell you 20 funny stories about that. But it's just been exciting to watch how it happens. And it's all because, Ted Barrett decided, I'm going to make a difference in umpiring. And he made an all-out commitment to that, got 2 seminary degrees along the way, and just remarkable leader. And then, me and a couple other people have joined him along the way to kind of support him and also co-infiltrate with him and just stay engaged with these guys and help trying to bring them to faith in Jesus. So anyway.